I'm so grateful to the mighty panel that we have um, uh, prepared for you. It's myself and our partner in the work, Karen Tumlin from the Justice Action Center. I'm going to provide some like broad arc for the conversation that we're about to have, but Karen joins us, I believe, in Los Angeles, right, Karen? From the Justice Action Center, and by way of a brief bio that you can see in the background, Karen is a nationally recognized impact litigator on immigrants' rights and has successfully litigated numerous cases of national significance, including a challenge to the Trump administration's effort to end the Daca program and the Muslim ban, as well as the constitutional challenge to Arizona's notorious anti-immigrant law SB 1070, which is why we could not think of a better person to join us on a panel that's centering and focused on DACA, but also gives a broad overview of what's happening at the federal scene. Just to echo what Senator Durazo shared, I've been doing this work a long time, and this moment has really highlighted that immigrant workers are essential to every part of the economy functioning right now, but often deemed illegal, not allowed to be here at all, or excluded from federal packages. And I think that it's a really important moment today as we think about immigrant communities' healthcare access, their economic security, all of our economic security, that ensuring immigrant communities have access to resources so they can thrive is a critical part of COVID recovery and relief. Without it, none of us are well. I want to move to a broad timeline, though, of the way that the White House has responded. Reflects that. We, more often than not, and I don't have to share this with, sort of reiterate this for all of you, we don't hear the same from the White House at all. When the global pandemic began, we actually saw a broad frame of exclusion, xenophobic narrative coming from the White House that has very real implications for our actual bodies. On March 13th, ICE announced that it would end all visits to detention centers. It was the first sort of broad strokes decree that we got from the White House. At that time, also, the US announced European travel restrictions, but ICE's limitation to detention centers often extended to their legal representation as well. Just a few days later, ICE reschedules in-person check-ins and pushes back the timeline for recent arrivals to be able to have their cases adjudicated. Again, a dip into due process, and really you're seeing a deep exclusion of immigrant communities' ability to access those institutions that would enable them to thrive. Very soon after that, you see a suspension of in-person services. All of these started, of course, and included access to healthcare for those folks who were in detention. Last week, we saw our first passing of someone in Otay Mesa who had COVID-19. All of this has very real impacts. Asylum cases, as well as the refugee cases, that same second week of March were suspended by the White House, and the United States extended travel restrictions to the UK and Ireland. Finally, on March 18th, well, not finally, because I want to get to April very quickly. On March 18th, the United States limits cross-border travel between the United States and Mexico, again, having a very deleterious impact on refugees and asylee seekers. And the DOJ closes immigration courts and postpones leaving thousands of people in limbo who can't access any of the services or any of the due process hearings that might enable them to stay. In April, the White House moves to focusing solely on the pandemic, but excludes immigrant communities from all aspects of relief, except in very limited cases. So both the Families First Coronavirus Recovery Act, as well as the CARES Act, exclude immigrant workers from direct payments, exclude families from being able to access the same kinds of healthcare services and economic security packages, from unemployment insurance to extended SNAP, that every other family has access to. Most recently, on April 22nd, the Trump White House signs an executive order limiting immigration overall, particularly those families trying to join themselves. I think, trying to come together, be reunited. I think I wanted to just lay the federal scene. At the top of our minds, of course, is, on top of all of the things that we are thinking through and worried about, is the impending Daca decision and what it means for thousands of young people in this country who have been here their whole lives, and really, their aspiration is to stay, I would imagine, overwhelmingly. Karen, could I bring you into the conversation for some updates about Daca, where we are in the process, and what we might be able to think through? Can you hear me?
Great.
Great, I can hear you too.
Yeah, thank you so much, Almas. Did we want to start with the video?
Why don't we start with your thoughts and maybe end with the video before we move to questions, just in case time is a concern. And
Great.
I'll make sure that's teed up.
Okay, and Almas, when do you want to end this session? Just since I know we started late, 1:45?
Please take all the time you need, but probably 1:40, between 1:45 and 50.
Okay, perfect. I just want to make sure. So it's so nice to be with all of you virtually on California Immigrant Day. Thank you so much to Almas and all of CIPC for including me. And yeah, just want to say that I know it's different this year, but really appreciate the movement energy behind making this happen. So it is my pleasure to talk about Daca. And I just want to a little bit about where we're at with the Supreme Court case and what we might be expecting, because I'm sure that's what's on the top of everyone's mind. So we're waiting for a Supreme Court decision. That's the biggest news. When could that decision come down? Well, the shortest answer I can give you is the earliest we could get a decision is this Thursday. And the latest we could get a decision is the very end of June, around June 26th or 29th. And really, it could be as soon as Thursday. The reason for that is as follows. The Supreme Court right now heard oral arguments in the Daca cases on November the 12th. And they issue their decisions by the end of June when they take a recess. It's a weird year for the Supreme Court, like all courts, because of coronavirus. The Supreme Court actually closed their doors and stopped hearing oral arguments. But then they restarted hearing them by phone last week. So what does that mean? It means they have 18 cases where they've already heard arguments before last week. And that's my husband's, my child's Zoom class. Let me ask him to turn that down 1 second. Felix, my sweet, turn that down. This is everyone's world. Okay, so what this means is there are 18 decisions that they had already heard and they have to issue. But last week they started hearing 10 new cases, so a total of 28 cases between now and June. The reason I'm telling you that is there's some belief that there's a little bit of pressure for them to issue their decisions in May in cases that were heard before May, and June for those 10 cases that they heard in May. There's no science. No one has a crystal ball, right? It could be Thursday that we get a DACA decision, or it could be the very last day of the term. That's why we've been preparing. It's very anxiety producing, of course. If you are an individual with DACA and every day one of these decisions come up, you have to wait at 7 a.m. Pacific time and see, is today the day? So that's just the timing piece. But what could the Supreme Court decide? So this is the part of the conversation where we all take a deep breath. I am going to actually do the worst case scenarios first and then end with the best case scenarios. Okay, so that was my pause to say I'm going to start with the bad decisions. So the Supreme Court has before it basically two questions. Number one, can they even decide at all if the way in which the Trump administration ended DACA was lawful or not? And to put it differently, the question is, can the court even say anything about that, or is it a totally political question that they can't answer? Okay? If they say, yeah, we can say something about this, then they go on to question two, which is the way President Trump ended DACA, was it lawful or illegal? So that's the landscape for what we're dealing with. So on the first piece, the question of, can they decide this at all? Worst case scenarios first are they say, yeah, we have something to say about how the president ended DACA. And then they go on and they say, it was perfectly lawful the way the president ended the DACA program. And the very worst answer of it all would be if they then said, and by the way, we never thought DACA was legal in the first place, okay? The reason why that would be so damaging for us is that kind of decision, which I want to be very clear, they don't have to say that last part. That part about whether DACA is lawful or not, they really don't have to say it. So we're very much hoping they have nothing to say about that unless it's that DACA is the most legal thing they've ever seen in their lives. The reason that would be problematic is it would really limit our ability in future administrations to seek a program that is more expansive than DACA, right? So we all know that DACA is critically important to Californians, but it's only the floor of what we need and what we're fighting for. We need something much bigger for our families and our communities. I'm going to ask my child to turn that down just for a second, very nicely, like moms do. Felix, love, I really need you to turn that down, sweetie. Did you hear me? Okay, moving on.
Karen, if it matters, we can hear you fine. I don't know if you can hear me fine on the computer, but you're okay.
Okay, I really appreciate that. I have a child who's playing his motivational music very loud, but these are the joys of homeschools and working. So, okay, so that's the very worst case scenario. It only gets better from here, you guys. So other decisions that the Supreme Court could reach include, and in that very worst case scenario, I want to be clear that renewals would end immediately, right? There would be no more renewals of DACA, and what we would be concerned about or worried about if the Supreme Court had gone so far as to say we think DACA was unlawful in the first place is what would happen to existing work authorizations. Lesser bad decisions that the Supreme Court could reach include that they could say, we can decide about this, we think the termination of DACA was properly done, and then, but DACA, people with current DACA, it would stay in place until it ended. An in-between decision is the Supreme Court could say, we can't answer this question, it's too political. Now, that would be bad for DACA right now, okay? It would be very bad, right? Because what that would allow is the termination to take effect. So no more new renewals. But if they said this, I really want to point out that this loss in the short term, if they said, we can't answer this question, no court can answer the question, could be good in a future administration. And the reason for that is they would have said nothing about the legality of DACA one way or the other. And it creates space for a new president to say, we want not only DACA, we want a program much bigger. And guess what, courts? You can't say anything about it. So always we want to be looking for, how do we win? And how do we lose? And what can we build based on that and continue to build? Two more quick scenarios and then I'll pause and turn it back over to Almas. So, and they're all going to get better from here. There are at least two ways of winning. One way of winning will be familiar to those of you who were following the census case last year or last term. So this Supreme Court could say, you know what, we're not totally sure if how the president ended DACA was lawful or not. And we think the evidence in this record is really incomplete. And from what we can see, it looks really stinky. So we're going to send it back to the lower courts to get more evidence. It's called a remand. But if that happened, the current status quo for DACA would stay in place and renewals would continue, and we go back and we would work really hard in the lower courts to keep DACA in place and get us through the election. Okay, we've reached the best decision, and the best decision would be that the Supreme Court says we can answer this question, and like the courts below from coast to coast say the way DACA was ended was totally unlawful and it cannot go forward. And here, the one thing I want to add is, if the Supreme Court says that, because they are supreme, they're not a lower court, not only should renewals continue, this should open the door for initial first-time applicants for DACA to apply. So this includes individuals who only met the age or educational requirements for DACA eligibility after September 5th, 2017. And I say that because in a state like ours in California, that could be very important. So that's where I would kind of stop for now on this, and in case you want to do questions, or let me know if there's anything else you wanted me to cover.
There's a couple of things that I would love to hear from you about, but I want to pause. We have about 125 people with us on the line. If you have specific questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat. I will read them out loud and share them with folks and share them with Karen. It's like a sobering moment around DACA, of course. A couple of things that I wanted to ask of you, Karen. I don't know if you're comfortable doing this, but if you had to read the tea leaves, where do you think we are? That's the first question. The second question is, CIPC and all of its partners are not only monitoring this situation very closely, but are really worried about our colleagues and friends, some family members in some instances, who are DACA grantees, and what organizing or what support might look like regardless of the outcome. So while we wait for other questions, I defer to you on question one. I think that's a tough one. If you'd like to go to the organizing question, please do.
Yeah, I'll give it a try at both. They're hard questions. So I have no perfect tea leaves either. And the Supreme Court is an unusual beast. But what I'll say is, of course I'm hopeful that we could win. But I also know how important DACA is. So we have to be ready with our organizing and political responses for potential loss. And, this is the Supreme Court who, it's different, slightly different justices, but we did lose before them on DAPA. And that was a heartbreaking experience for so many of us in the community. And so that grounds me and reminds me that even though, I've been part of the legal team in these cases and we fought so hard, and we're hopeful that they're taking our arguments seriously and that we will have a positive result, that we know we have to be ready for the possibility of a negative. So on organizing responses, which I appreciate that question so much, particularly in California, where we have literally 51% of all DACA recipients live in our state. I would point to two different resources where I would really love folks to be looking to plug into organizing, and also, mental health and legal assistance services, particularly in the event of a DACA loss. One is the campaign website for Home is Here, which you can find at homeishere.us. And the second is informedimmigrant.com. And I'm flagging the Informed Immigrant website as well, because they've been putting up some really good mental health services as well, to understand that if we're in a loss scenario, that of course is hard on our communities, and that folks will need access to not only legal supports, but those supports. But most important, I guess what I wanted to say is, from my perspective, DACA is a program that was willed into existence by undocumented young people. Before there was a name for DACA, undocumented youth were organizing and being arrested and creating the conditions that led to this program. I believe that our response, if we lose, will similarly be driven by undocumented communities who know that a Supreme Court loss on a program like this can be changed by a political response, right? Including who is voted into office, including calling immediately, even if we lose at the Supreme Court, for President Trump to use his own power to not implement that termination of DACA when he's facing re-election months after that. And that's what gives me energy and gives me hope, is I know we have a program to protect because undocumented young people created that program.
Sorry, I'm so used to muting, unmuting. Thanks for that. That's really powerful. And I think we're going to see a campaign video in just a few minutes. I wanted to share a couple of the questions because I'm a little bit closer, I think, to the chat, and a comment that Cynthia Buiza, the ED at CIPC, says hello. We have a question from someone who's joining us that they have a family member who had DACA, married somebody, and now can neither get a green card nor can get their DACA renewed, I believe. And I think legal counsel is always a little bit tough on calls like this, but just the general state of what it might mean for someone whose DACA renewal has lapsed and avenues to staying in the US. Maybe that's a better way to answer the question.
Yeah. So I'll do the general first and then just make sure I get the specific right. So yeah. General first, right? What's most important for DACA recipients, whether they're in current DACA status or had it in the past, is that all of our studies have shown that between 14 or maybe even 30% of DACA recipients are eligible for some other form of immigration relief, right? So the best advice that we can give to folks is, with DACA, and again, regardless of whether you have DACA today or you had it in the past, is seek out individual legal counsel so you can see if there's another form of relief that you may be eligible for. And don't forget, immigration courts are constantly in motion, precedents are constantly changing. If back in 2012, when you applied for DACA, you did a consult and you weren't eligible then, you should still ask this question now, right? So that's my first kind of piece of advice. On the question of, the specific question, was it a DACA recipient who had married someone with status but was not able to?
Right, so it sounds like they're not able to renew their DACA nor get what I would imagine is something like a green card or another visa.
Right, so on renewing DACA, the one thing I would say, again, big picture, even if you let your DACA expire for any reason, right? You couldn't pay the fee, they didn't process it in time, it doesn't matter. You can still, if you ever had DACA, if you still meet the eligibility, you can apply, even if it's been a year. Even if it's been over a year, you can. So I want to say that clearly. Secondly, this piece about, I always take the opportunity to talk about what I think is a basic, huge injustice in our immigration laws, right? Which is for some category of people who came into the country without a visa, right? For one way or another. If you came in and then you marry, for example, a US citizen, no, even though US citizens are supposed to be able to secure green cards for their spouses, you are barred. However, if you happen to have the fortune to come into the United States, even on a tourist visa, right? And then you overstayed that visa for 20 years and you marry a US citizen, you can get your green card. And that basic injustice that creates a difference between how you first came in, whether it was with some kind of visa, even if temporary and long expired, and if you came in without permission, is to my mind a great, quite frankly, a racist piece of our law that was created in 1996. I always flag that as something that we need to continue to advocate around for change, because it would impact so many people.
We have a question related to that, which is whether, thank you for that, the April 22nd executive order would impact something like that.
Sure.
Privately.
Absolutely. Thank you for flagging that. The April 22nd executive order that is now in effect. So first of all, it does not cover certain categories of family immigrants, specifically the one we've been talking about. spouses of US citizens are exempt from that order. So are children. of US citizens if they're under 21. So I want to be clear about that. However, if you're in a different category, let's say you are the mom of a US citizen, you would be impacted by that April 22nd order, which right now, however, is only in place for 60 days. If it's not extended, it will lift at the end of June. And I want to be really clear about this piece too. There are waivers and exceptions to that bar, and the government has clarified for us in litigation that consulates around the world, even with COVID, are taking what's called emergency and urgent interviews in case you meet an exception to this green card ban. So I wanna flag that as something that folks who may be hit in this position and really are harmed by having their loved ones kept outside the country, something to keep in mind.
Thanks so much, Karen. There's a one quick question. What is the name of the second support program that you noted in your early comments? I think the first was Home is Here, and even I need a reminder.
The second is informedimmigrant.com.
Thanks, and what can people find there?
On informedimmigrant.com, you're going to be able to find information about where to go to renew your DACA. And also critically, something I like about this site is they have a lot of mental health resources as well for documented folks.
Cool. We have a final comment, and then I have a question for you, and then I think we're going to show the campaign video.
Great.
Our close partner in the work, Bruno, thank you, Karen, for uplifting the incredible organizing of undocumented youth that pressured the former administration to create an executive order that led to the DACA program. And at the time, DAPA, although that is not in effect anymore. So just a note of gratitude to you. On that, did you want to add anything?
No, just thank you, Bruno. I think that's really important for us to recognize why we have this program and to recognize that power.
I know that we've never talked about this, but I know you went to incredible lengths to organize DACA grantees the day of the SCOTUS hearing. Everything from getting people's coats. I just heard all the things from friends and colleagues in DC. What is energy that you felt that day that you think those of us who are feeling kind of heavy right now or weighted by the potential outcome of the DACA decision, what do you think we should hold?
That's such a good question. It's one that will likely make me emotional. I think it was such a privilege to get to be at the Supreme Court that day in community with so many folks who had come so far to be there and to show the court that this was not a legal case on the books or on the papers, but this was about our communities and our families. I think that what people should hold is there was this moment for me, and I went inside the Supreme Court to hear the arguments that day, and I've been inside the Supreme Court before, but I've never seen anything like this. There were over 50 DACA recipients who went inside the Supreme Court that day to hear arguments. The Supreme Court is not big, so in that room of maybe 200 or something people, at least 50 of them were DACA recipients, which changes what the court looks like and what the justices were looking at. But there's this moment when we were leaving the court, and it's the Supreme Court, y'all. It's like heavy marble doors with golden, handles. And I had gotten our group back together, and I was the person who got to push open the doors, and they're heavy, they're huge, they're gold. But before I got there, I could hear the rally inside the Supreme Court. And we pushed open the doors, and the DACA recipients all came out, and the rally saw them and said, "The plaintiffs are here." And the rally was chanting, "Home is here," up at the steps to the DACA leaders and recipients who were chanting back at them, and everybody froze. The marshals who normally yell at you to get out of the way, everybody froze and cried. And I think that's what we should hold, because in that moment, which I've never seen before, inside of the court was connected to outside of the court. And that to me is what makes change. when it isn't about courts, when we bring what's on the street into the court and connect it. So that's what I'm holding close to me.
Thanks, Karen. I have so much more I could ask you, but I think a good way to close out and transition to our next discussion is, Isabella, if you can hear my voice, could we play the Home is Here campaign video of Fernanda's story? And Karen, I am so grateful for you, just in case we don't get a proper close. Thank you.
Thank you. Grateful for all of you.
Thank you.
A lot of families are afraid of what's going to happen in the coming months, in the coming years, and are still reeling from what's been happening in our country. And we need to remember that at the foreground is the family and not so much the individual. And so as a DACA recipient, I know that I have the privilege to be able to work and go to school and drive a car with a license and have a social security number, but a lot of people don't have that privilege. Junior year of high school, my parents were put into deportation proceedings, and I actually missed my first day of college because I had to go to court with my parents to find out if they were getting deported. And so DACA, from the very beginning, felt like you're safe, but your parents are not. As I was hearing all the stories from other immigrants in Alabama, I just kept hearing the same story over and over and over again. Not having access to legal representation, not having a voice almost in the legal system. What kind of began as this like suggestion from people, hey, like you should go to law school. I just said it one day. My personal relationship with immigration is going to inform me in a way that I'll never be able to learn in a classroom. It's important for me to talk about how you don't have to be doing something quote unquote bad to be detained and sent to a detention center and spend months there. I guess I want to help inform policy so that those who can't get involved for one reason or another can enjoy the benefits of a more inclusive society. DACA recipients haven't gone silent since they received DACA. They've been fighting for something more permanent the minute that we got DACA. We won that battle. We fought that battle, and we've been fighting that battle all along. I think this decision has the ability to shift so much for so many people. If the court were to side with DACA recipients, then it would just tell us you're home.
Thanks, everybody. We're going to start a pretty powerful conversation around schools and communities first in about 5 minutes. I can see some of the panelists are with us. Any questions or concerns leading into the next section, please drop anything that might be on your mind into the chat and Q&A.